we seem to have fallen to a place and a time in our national discourse where even the mere restatement and affirmation of laws long ago crafted and duly enacted by our constitutional republic's legislature, laws that were formed and codified in the People's House by the people's representatives, is now considered controversial?
That was Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clarke taking the stage last night to close out CPAC, defending the Trump administration's crackdown on illegal immigration. Clarke praised the focus on what he calls the rule of law and rallied conservatives to support the president's policies. Sheriff David Clarke joins me right now. Sheriff, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Maria.
Well, congratulations on what was a speech that a lot of people are talking about this morning. And you ended the speech last night by saying, go forth to stand and fight. What did you mean by that, Sheriff?
Well, we're at a crossroads in this country right now. We have a new administration, and we finally have some pushback against this lawlessness and this chaos that's gone on probably for the last decade. And so this country will now define itself probably for the next generation. And I took people back through the history, starting at the founding of this republic and what George Washington said about it, Thomas Jefferson, Dr. Martin Luther King, Ronald Reagan, to remind people of how we got there and how people had to fight. People died. They gambled their fortunes, their lives, their family, their existence, so that future generations could be free. And so I think we're at that right now, and I want to give people, again, reminder of what it took. It took a fight. It took a struggle. It wasn't easy then, and it's not going to be easy now.
Well, you know, it's hard to understand how sanctuary cities, for example, have existed for so many years, even though it has been, in fact, against the law. And here you have a president coming in saying, I'm the law and order candidate. We're going to start following the rule of law, and it becomes controversial.
You know, that's amazing, and I was hoping maybe you could help me out here, because I'm just as lost about it, that enforcing the rule of law, the bedrock of our Constitution, the bedrock of freedom and liberty, is now controversial. And I thought to myself, just because prior administrations for a long time, and it's transcended political parties, weren't enforcing our borders, weren't protecting our borders, weren't enforcing the immigration statutes on the books, now all of a sudden President Trump comes along and he told us what he was going to do with existing law. He didn't make any new law, and now all of a sudden that becomes controversial. Just because it was enforced our borders and our immigration laws for the last 3 decades doesn't mean that President Donald Trump is obligated to follow that. He's not. He's getting back to the rule of law. The illegal immigration is a crisis in this country. Most of the people in Washington don't want to touch it. It's kind of like that third rail. But President Trump decided and has told us he's going to lead this country. He's going to get his arms around this thing, even though he knows it's going to come without that, with that struggle, so to speak. But he's willing to do this because, like I said, this is a crisis. This has to be rectified. There's numerous reasons why we need to protect the border. We have some national security issues, domestic security issues. We have drugs pouring in across our southern border. Also, you want to be able to protect public health. Remember the Ebola outbreak? Well, we started doing that overseas and at the border. And then you want to control the amount of immigrants coming into refugees coming into the country, because it's a strain on our limited resources. And so that's why you have to have a border. We're a sovereign nation. And if you have that border, you must protect that border and defend that border. And right now it's pretty porous.
So the president has taken this position that those 7 countries that are largely Muslim countries are going to be the countries that are blocked in terms of people coming in. We're waiting on this new executive order that's expected to be out tomorrow, Sheriff. But what about this intelligence report that found that in the past 6 years, foreign-born individuals who were inspired to strike in the U.S. came from 26 different countries, not necessarily from those 7 Muslim-majority countries that are being blocked due to terror risk in the president's executive order. What do you say to critics who say, look, we just heard from the Department of Homeland Security and this intelligence report that says otherwise?
Yeah, well, I trust the people at the national security agencies. I trust the people at the State Department who looked at the data, looked at the research, and came up with this group of 7 nations. I don't know how they came about it, but I trust what they did to do that. This was very finely, and that's what I think the hang-up is you can't just have this broad blanket of countries. You have to narrowly define it, and that's what the president did. Now he's going to refine it some more, And once this thing is finally rectified, it'll be fought in the courts. The courts will decide probably in the end. But I don't like the fact that the courts are intruding on the executive branch and taking over national security, which is the purview of the executive. It is the President of the United States that takes the oath to defend the United States against foreign threats, not the courts. The courts get to review some of this stuff, but that decision that was made out of that Washington State court to strike down the illegal immigration order, I think was plain wrong. We have a separation of powers, and I think the courts seeped into the executive branch's responsibility for domestic and national security.
Sheriff, before you go, there was a lot of talk at CPAC yesterday about the possibility of you running for Senate. There's a big push for you to run in 2018. Are you planning on it?
Well, you know what? I haven't even really thought about that. That's why it's a draft movement, trying to drag me in, kicking and screaming. You know, I never say never, but at the same time, it's not the highest thing on my priority list. But I like the energy and the enthusiasm that people have shown all across this country. It's a national movement. So I'll take my time with a decision like that, and we'll see how it plays out down the road. All
right, well, we'll be watching. Sheriff David Clarke, good to see you as always, sir. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Maria.
We'll see you soon.